Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. In this video, we will be covering some very frequently asked interview questions that have been asked to 5+ years of experienced people for the Java backend profile. These set of questions consists of multiple combinations of not only Java questions, some Spring Boot, Hibernate, SQL, microservices, because all these things combinedly creates a strong structure for Java backend profile. So let's get started and cover all those questions that have already been asked in interviews to such developers. Also, please like, share and subscribe to support us. Your one like and one comment will immensely have a supporting hand to us to motivate us to create more such videos. So let's get started. We're going to start this series with a very tricky question that have been asked in Goldman Sachs to one of the Java developer. Can you use HashMap in a multi-threaded environment? It completely depends upon the scenario. If you're having a microservice architecture and if you follow the CQRS design pattern, that is command and query responsibility segregated in multiple microservices. So there will be one service which is just a query service where you will only have the GET request coming to your microservice. In that microservice, if there is only GET request, no modifications to the data, only the get of the data, then you can use HashMap easily because there will be only reading from the HashMap, no modifications, and hence no concurrent modification exception can occur in such situation. But in case if you have a proper web application created with Spring Boot having all the CRUD operations in a single application, that is all the create, update, delete, get, everything happens in a single application, and that application uses that HashMap as an underlying data structure, then if one is reading, another is modifying, then obviously you will get a concurrent modification exception, and that problem can be solved using the ConcurrentHashMap or the HashTable. But I always prefer using ConcurrentHashMap because it has much better performance than the HashTable. So the scenario will decide how will you respond to such situations. If you're using only GET request in the whole application, I don't mind. Go ahead, have HashMap. Performance is best in HashMap. But if you have multiple scenarios of concurrently modifying the same data structure, then I will never suggest you to go with HashMap. It will give you now and the concurrent modification exception and your application will be down. So better use the ConcurrentHashMap. For sure, your performance will go down comparative to the HashMap, but at least you will be safe from the concurrent modification exception issues. Next, you are creating a string. You have two options to create a string in Java. Using a literal, that is string s1 equals to double quotes hello, or string s2 equals to new string hello. So one is using the string literals, another is using the new operator. What is the difference between these two? This is where most of the developers gives the wrong answer. They say that the string literal creates the string in the string pool, which is a part of heap. While with the new operator, it creates only in the heap and not in the string pool. But that is not the correct answer. The correct answer is that yes, string literal ensures that the string is always created in string pool, which is a part of the heap area. But when you create a string using the new operator, it not only creates the hello string in heap area with a new object, but also in the string constant pool. If you create using the new keyword, it will be created in both the heap and the string pool if string pool doesn't have it already. If it is already having it, then it will not create for sure. While in case of string literals, no new object is created in heap, only an object is created in string literal pool. And why do we do that? We create using the string literal pool because we want that when multiple strings come and have the same value of hello, they should not create n number of objects hello, 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 hello in heap. They can all point to the same object in the string constant pool, hence prevents the duplicacy, hence prevents the memory wastage. Being immutable gives you the same value across multiple places. So that's the difference between creating the string using the new operator and using the string literals. Which design pattern have you used in your project and why? And have you used the factory design pattern? In both the scenarios, you will always say that yes, the factory design pattern is the most commonly used design pattern in the enterprise level applications in Java background. Factory design pattern belongs to the creational design patterns because it is surrounded by how do we create different instances. Hence, the logic of object creation is not exposed to client. You have a standard segregation between the client and object creation, and that abstraction helps you to not expose any logic on how actually the object is created to the clients. One very live example in their real life is that in the car, when you change the gear, you do not know the internal functionality. So you don't know what logic is written for changing the gears from 1, 2 and how speed is managed. But you know that when you move to gear 1, the speed will be 0 to 10. For the second gear, you have speed up to 20 and so on. So the logic is not known to you. But you know how just by putting a gear to second, you will have your speed up to 20. So the logic is not known, but you know using this interface of gear, you can do your work. So that is also why it is called as virtual constructor. Internals are not known, but you still construct an object without knowing how it is getting created. But at the end, you will have your object with it. Also, I've created a separate video on design patterns. You can check the playlist in the channel where all the 5 creational design patterns are covered by us. And still, if we have issues, just let me know in the comment section. I need to go a bit quick in the interview series because I need to cover a lot of questions. But still, if any question is still not very clear, just let me know in the comment section. Either I'll give a link to the video or I'll explain it explicitly. Now, the next very important question that is for sure you need to answer in a backend interviews. That is, what are the important features of Java 8 and what have you used in your project and how. So I'll list all the important features. That's lambda expression, stream APIs, default methods, static methods, functional interface, optional, method references, datetime API and Nash run. Now what I have used in my project, how you can answer to that? You can always say that we have used the stream APIs because we have to work with the collections and they seamlessly interact with the collections. So stream API is what we have used. Also with the stream APIs, we for sure need to have the lambda expressions. That's how the stream APIs can work with lambda expression seamlessly. We also have used the default methods because we don't want to break all the concrete classes by introducing one of the abstract method in interface. That's why we have created default methods in interface. Also, we have used optional to prevent null pointer exceptions. And that's how you can explain how you have used these features in your project. Now, when it comes to Spring Boot, the very important question being asked is, what are Spring Boot starter dependencies? So, Spring Boot starter dependencies are the set of pre-configured dependencies that can be easily included in your project to get quickly up and started with the common features or technologies. Now, for example, I need to create a web application. The only thing I need to do is to add the Spring Boot starter web dependency, and just this dependency will have everything configured in your project to make it up and running with all the required libraries in your build path. With minimal configuration, by adding the starter to your project, you can quickly get up and running. The exact next question they will come to you is, what is actually inside the Spring Boot starter dependencies? What it actually have in reality? So Spring Boot starters in reality is a Maven template which contains the collection of all the transitive dependencies needed for a particular functionality. Now they will ask you, what are transitive dependencies? So suppose for the Spring Starter web, I need a Tomcat dependency. But Tomcat dependency need X dependency. X dependency need Y dependency. Now if you keep on adding first the Tomcat, then your project will fail saying the Tomcat needs X. Then you add X to your build path. Now it says, oh, X is added, but I need Y to make X working, and hence to make the Tomcat working, and hence to make the web application working. Then you keep on adding Y, and so on. Now, even in the course of adding these dependencies manually to build path, there could be a chance that you might have the wrong version of that particular dependency or the jar added. Then again, your project will fail saying it's incompatible with the X, so transitivity dependency fails. To prevent all such issues of version conflicts, transitive dependencies issues, where you need X to have Y, Y to have Z. So to prevent all these things, it's better to create the set of all these jars or dependencies as a collection in one starter dependency and give it to you as a complete starter dependency. Your task is just to add it in a POM, have it up and running and have fun. Now next is, what is Spring Boot Actuator and why is it used, and did you use it in your project, and if you have used it, why have you used it? So Spring Boot Actuator is a beautiful feature provided by Spring to us to monitor and manage the capability of your Spring Boot application in multiple environments. What does they actually give you? They expose information about your application's health, its matrices, the beans that are created, the environment variables that are being used. These endpoints are used to manage and monitor your application. Mostly these are used to manage your production environment to see whether everything is fine, if health is up and running, if the proper beans are created or not. So again, for the Spring Boot actuator also, we have a separate video on the channel. You can go and have a check. We have told you how to create the actual endpoints for all such endpoints and how to expose it and use it in your environments. Next, how do you configure the same property with different values for different environments? Now this is a tricky way of asking what is profiling in Spring Boot. I'll give you an example. Suppose I have a database to connect. That MySQL DB has a different server URL for dev environment, different URL for prod environment, different for test environment. So all these databases are not connected with each other. Otherwise, if you have the common database for production and development, if you modify anything in development, even your production will get affected, which should never be the case. So you should always have the different databases for different environments. Now, how do you specify the different URL for each environment? Then you can use the profiling in Spring Boot. So profiling is a way to map your components and beans to a specific profiles. For example, I want to map my database URL source to a proper particular URL for each different environment. So you can create n number of profiles and add your customized URL in all those separate profiles. You can do this either with the properties file. For example, application.properties, application-dev.properties, application-test.properties, and so on. Also, you can do it with application.yaml file, having these as segregated with 3 or more dashes. The next question the interviewer will ask you is that, okay, you have created different profiles. How do you tell that which profile has to be active at this particular point of time? So there are 3 ways for that. The first is with the Java as Spring application set active profile as development. Second is in the properties file itself, like in application.properties or application.yaml, just add the Spring active profile as dev. These 2 are never recommended because whenever you push your code to any environment, you have to change this. I want to push on my QA environment, I need to change this. I need to push it to my test environment, change this. I need to push it to prod, change this. Else it will point to a wrong place. So the best way to do it is to pass as a JVM parameter. For example, like this during each deployment. Now a very famous question for Spring interviews, what is AOP? And why did you use AOP in your project? And if you have used it, what were the scenarios which you have captured using the AOP programming? So aspect-oriented programming is a programming design where you segregate your cross-cutting functionalities from your business logic. The cross-cutting functionalities, for example, security, logging, and many such things. We have a complete separate playlist on just AOP. You have multiple scenarios covered from the interview perspective also. So you can go ahead and have a look at that. Mostly whenever you answer such questions for AOP, always explain 4 things mainly. What is aspect, what is advice, what is point cut, what is join point. These are the 4 pillars on which the complete aspect-oriented programming stands for. Aspect is a class where you define all your point cuts and advices. The advice is the one who have the logic that has to be incorporated in your join point. What is a join point? A join point is an actual method on which your advice is applied. And how do you decide on which join point the advice has to be applied? That is point cut. So point cut is an expression that defines at which join point this advice has to be applied. So these 4 aspects are the 4 pillars of AOP. All these 4, including all the 5 type of advices, is explained in the video and the playlist. Now suppose in Spring Boot, you have defined your properties in the properties file. How will you use that property in your .java class? So the answer to that is you can always use @value annotation to access the properties which are defined in application.properties file in your Java class. Now a very tricky interview question. This is related to the REST endpoints that you create in your Spring Boot application. So when you create your REST endpoints in the controller, how will you let your consumers or clients know what is the contract that you have created with your APIs? So what does that contract means? What is contract in REST endpoint? The contract is the complete curl of your REST API. Basically, so if you have a get method, so your postman request will be get localhost 8080/get all employees. Along with headers, authorization if it is there, body if it is there, and all this all together, the complete curl of your REST API is known as contract. So how do you share your contract so that you don't have to go and tell each and every client, oh, you are not sending me header, I will not give you the response. Oh, you are giving a wrong HTTP verb, I am using get, you are using put, so I am not going to give you the proper response. So to prevent this kind of conflicts and issues with the clients who are going to use your contracts, how will you give them your exact API contracts to help them access your application? The answer to that is we have something called as Swagger. That Swagger is an open source service which is provided by Spring Boot already to you to make it easier for you to find out the structure of your API or the curl of your API or the contract of your API. So Swagger is the one who makes our life very easy by documenting the complete contract that you have for the API and sharing it with your clients. Now moving to microservices architecture. Have you used microservice architecture in your application? And if you have used, how did you convert your existing monolithic to microservice architecture? Now there are multiple ways in which you can divide the complete monolithic architecture into your microservices, standalone microservices. But few things you should always keep in mind before segregating the complete single application to multiple modularized microservices. The first thing is it should always be based on some capabilities like business capability. For example, I have e-commerce application. So now based on my business capability, I can have a product microservice, I can have a user microservice, I can have a cart microservice, order microservice, and these microservices are divided based on the capabilities, on the basis of business, on the basis of domains. Always remember, when you segregate your microservice, each microservice should have its own well-defined segregated responsibility following the single responsibility principle of design principles. And also they should be highly cohesive and least coupled microservices bounded by the bounded context principle of domain-driven design. These things you always have to keep in mind when you are segregating a complete monolithic application to single, standalone, segregated, loosely coupled microservices. Now, okay, fine, great. You have converted your monolithic to microservices. Very nice. Now, how will you make sure that your microservices are robust and fault tolerant? Now, in the monolithic one, you have a seamless way of handling the exceptions. But in the microservice architecture, what if one of the applications stop responding? How will you respond to the client saying, oh my god, I'm so sorry, one of our microservices is down? How is the best way to handle the faults whenever it happens in the microservices? So there are multiple tools out there in the market to help you. First is the Hystrix, second is the Resilience 4J. Hystrix was initially developed by Netflix. It is used to handle fault tolerances in distributed systems, especially in the microservice architecture. And it provides multiple features like circuit breaker, like whenever a particular microservice is not responding to the required microservice, then it breaks the circuit and have the fallback mechanism. So whenever a circuit is broken, there is a fallback method which says, oh my god, so sorry, the application is not working. So there is always a fallback mechanism where you can always, rather than giving 500 internal server exception, where user is blowing up his mind, what happened with the 500 internal server, I don't understand. You can give a user-friendly message that, sorry, our product service is down. I can give you user information if you need. Also, it gives some features like request timeout. So it doesn't at once says that, sorry, the product service is down. It tries for some 5 seconds, 7 seconds, that's the timeout that you have defined. And after that, it goes to the fallback mechanism saying, sorry, the microservice is down. So all these things were given by Hystrix, making your microservice much more fault tolerant. Now, but it seems Hystrix is not giving much support. So that is why a very lightweight library has come into picture for fault tolerance, that is Resilience 4J. It is actually inspired by Hystrix itself and provides many features like circuit breaker, rate limiter, retries, and many more functionalities and seamlessly integrate with Java 8 and even higher. So currently what I will suggest is, in the market, Resilience 4J is far more in demand than the Hystrix as of now. How does your microservices interact with each other? So the answer to that is, suppose I have an e-commerce application. Now my product service interacts with the cart service seamlessly in synchronous way, and my order service interacts with my email service in an asynchronous way. So basically, broadly, there are only two types of communication your microservices can have: synchronous or asynchronous. Synchronous communication is where client waits for the response from the target microservice. For example, I am adding a product to my cart. I need the product information first. So I will wait for getting the product information, then add that product to my cart. Obviously, right? You cannot just send, okay, I'm adding a product to the cart, I can wait for product information later on. No, at the same time, before adding the product to the cart, you need all the product information to be shown to the user. So that's the synchronous communication. You have to wait for the response from the product service before adding any product to the client's cart. And that is done through REST templates, web clients, fake clients, and there are many out there. But also there is something called as asynchronous communication, which increases the performance of the application to a very good extent. What happens here is, in this type of communication, the client doesn't need to wait for any kind of responses. It just sends the message to the message broker, be it ActiveMQ, be it RabbitMQ, be it Kafka. There is something called as message broker. That message broker is going to hold your request and you can leave it there and go ahead and have your own work done. Whenever the target microservice is up, it will fetch or pull that particular message from the broker, will do your task and will send you, okay, your task is done, have fun. I'll give you an example of this asynchronous communication in my e-commerce website. I have an email service, I have an order service. Whenever order is placed successfully, I need to send an email to the client. Now, does my order service has to wait to allow the user to browse for more products until the email is not sent to him? It should not. Email sending is a standalone functionality and searching or browsing the website is a standalone functionality. So you should not block user until he is able to send the email to the client. You should not allow the user to shop more. That should not happen. So client should not wait for response. Rather, go ahead, go for more shopping items. Here simultaneously I'm adding the complete template of email to my queue or the topic, and this email will be sent as a backend service by email microservice to your recipient. So that's asynchronous communication. Now we have covered many questions for Java, Spring, Spring Boot, AOP, REST templates. Now is the time to have some brush up on the interview questions on SQL. What types of join you have used in your SQL? So there are basically 4 types of joins in SQL: inner join, left outer join, right outer join, full join. Now remember one thing, which is supported in which database, you have to remember it, okay? For example, the full outer join is not supported in MySQL. So if you said that yes, I have used the relational DB as MySQL, but I've used the full outer join, for sure interviewer will know that you are bluffing because this is not a capability given by MySQL to you. So just be very careful when answering such questions. What type of joins have you used? So let's see all of these in details. What's inner join? Inner join is the one which is used to retrieve the record for only matching values for both the tables. For example, I have a table A, I have a table B. Now A has some 5 rows, B has some 5 rows. But the common rows for them is only 2. So the resultant will be only the 2 records which are common for table A and table B. Second is the left outer join, which is used to retrieve all the records from left and only the matching ones from right. Now suppose a table A has 5 records, table B has 5 records, but the common ones are only 2 again. So what will be the output? The output will be 5. All the 5 rows from the left one and the common from the right one. So the output rows will have the 5 rows from the left one and the 2 rows from the right table. Now right outer join, again only those records from the left one which are common and all the rows from the right. And the full outer join, all the rows from left, all the rows from right, and the common ones will be the matching ones. Suppose 5 rows are here in the left table, 5 rows are there in the right table, and the 2 are the common one. The output will be 3 which are uncommon from left, 3 which are uncommon from the right, and 2 for the common ones of both. So that's how these work. Remember, in MySQL, full outer join is not supported with this name, full join or full outer join. You have to have the left outer join, right outer join, and union both. Then only you will be able to get the full outer join. Also, videos on all the type of joins and tricky questions on SQL is also on the channel. Just let me know if you are not able to find it. I'll give the link to such playlist to you. Worked so much with the database. What are indexes? Have you used indexes? So indexes are the one which helps us speeding this database search. So any enterprise level application does not exist without indexes. Remember this. There will be at least one index, clustered, non-clustered. Any type of index for sure will be there in your database to increase the speed of database search. So why did you use indexes? To speed up the searching in the database. What will happen if you do not use the indexes? SQL will have to have the full table scan. That means if you have 10 rows, the SQL has to search all the 10 rows one by one, checking for the where clause, where my ID equals to 5. So all complete table scan has to be done. to check each and every row where the ID is 5. This is very slow operation when the data is very large. And suppose if your data is around 10,000 and you are searching for ID 10,000, the complete 10,000 row has to be searched, which is very bad in performance. So that is why indexing is used. And how does indexing works internally? Internally, the indexing stores the pointers in the sorted format for your column which has to be indexed. So internally, there is a data structure being used. There are multiple data structures used, but the very common one is the B tree, which is very time efficient for lookups, deletions, insertions. Since it is a tree, all these lookups, everything can be done in log of n time rather than order of n. So here when you are searching all the rows, the complexity is order of n. But when you are searching with the trees, the complexity is order of log n. And how do you create an index? To create an index, create index name on your table name and on which column of that table you need to create an index. Suppose I want to create an ID, so create index ID on employee and bracket my ID. Now we have covered SQL also. Let's see how Hibernate goes now. So what is the difference between the first level and second level cache in Hibernate? So in Hibernate, the first level cache is always associated with the session object, while the second level cache is associated with the session factory level. So that is why first level cache is by default and there is no way to disable it. While the second level cache, which is associated with session factory, is default disabled, but you can enable it through configurations. Now since the first level cache is associated with session, as soon as the session closes, the first level cache is destroyed. But when it comes to second level cache, since it is associated with session factory, so even if your session closes, it doesn't matter, your cache entries are safe and they are destroyed only when the application is destroyed. Now common annotations for Hibernate. So in Hibernate, what is Hibernate? It is ORM framework, that is object relational mapping. It maps your POJO to your table. So all the annotations in Hibernate will be the one to create a table, to create an ID, to create a property, to make that particular class as entity. So @entity to make your object oriented class as a table. So that's mapping between your object oriented class to a relational table. Then you have @table to map this as a table in the database and give a name, a proper name to that particular entity. Then @ID to create the primary key in the table. Embedded ID to create a composite primary key in the table. @column to indicate the column in the database. @generated value to have the strategy for the primary key generation. Now there can be multiple ways to generate the primary key, and based on that you have the Hibernate sequence created. Also you have multiple mappings, so one to one, one to many, many to one, many to many are the ways to define the mapping between multiple entities in the table. And cascade is the one which is used to define the cascading behavior between two entities. Now suppose there is a parent, there is a child. If I just want to save the parent, not the child, you can have the cascade type in that way. So cascade type enum is used to define the cascading type in your parent and child relationship. Now what is criteria API in Hibernate? So we have seen SQL enough, right? Now how to write this SQL query in an object oriented way in Hibernate? That's criteria for you. So criteria is a powerful and flexible way to create the Hibernate query language. Basically a way to query the database. And it's basically an object oriented way of doing it. Criteria interface is used for this. And I'll give you an example. Session.createCriteria for which class? So this is actually creating a select query on employee table where the name is starting with A. So A and percentage means any name starting with A is going to be listed as the result. So this is the object oriented way of writing a query. Select star from employee where name like A percentage. To make it an object oriented way, you have session.createCriteria. Create criteria will have the object oriented way of having a class and an object oriented way of having the attribute name here. So this criteria is an object oriented way of querying a table in ORM framework. Remember, criteria is going to help you have only the select queries with the where clauses. It's not going to help you any kind of updations with update, delete, that you cannot do with the criteria query. Now, if that is the criteria query, is there any way in Hibernate you can support the SQL query? Suppose I don't want to write this much big query. I want to just write a very simple select star from employee where named like the A%. How will you do that? The way is, yes, you also have a choice for that. I've always said you Hibernate is very flexible enough. When integrated with Spring Boot, you have multiple options to have it customized. So yes, Hibernate provides you the way to create the SQL query, and the way is session.create SQL query. In the previous one, you can see you have session.create criteria. Then how will you create this query, SQL query? Session.create SQL query. And then in the parameter, you can give your query select star from table where name like this, and where name is going to be something like set parameter like this. And then you list and you will get the result. Also, you have support not only for the native SQL queries, you have support for the name queries. And these named queries are the queries that you write in your POJOs just above your POJO stats. You can always use @named queries there. So that was all about multiple questions that are asked for the Java backend profile from SQL, Hibernate, Spring Boot, microservices, REST API, code, Java. We have tried to cover almost all such questions that are actually being touched in interviews for 5+ year experienced people. If you want more such videos with 7+ experience, 9+ experience, so 5+ experience is basically those people who are going on senior software developer. 7+ where you actually goes for some team lead position. So if you need more such segregated videos, just let me know in the comment section. We'll create more videos for you. Thank you.